Hey, it's Patrick Grosser with Fathom Realty. If you're thinking about selling your home, you need to understand each step of the sales process in order to sell quickly for top dollar. Take a look. After you've listed, it's time for showings. Believe it or not, one of the most challenging aspects of selling your home is simply scheduling showings. It may seem easy to schedule one showing request with one potential buyer and their agent, but if you've done your job effectively in the coming soon status, you've probably attracted a lot of attention, and you're going to have several agents and buyers asking you for a showing on the very first day that it's available, which is a good thing, but you don't want to drop the ball with any of them because any one of them could be your buyer. So the question becomes, as you're getting phone calls, emails, texts for all these different dates and times from all these different people, how do you keep it organized and make sure that you confirm those showings for something that works for your schedule, and you also communicate that to those buyers? The best way to do that is through a free app through the MLS. If you're working with an agent, it'll allow you to accept or reject or propose a new time for each showing. Once it's confirmed, it'll log that date and time for the showing, and it'll also pass along the access information to the agent as well. You want to prepare for showings, of course, just the same way you would if you're having people over your house, if you're entertaining, or just the way you did for photography. You want it to be clean and staged, and it's very important that your home looks exactly the way it did in the photos. You don't want to add or subtract anything, no surprises. The buyers scheduled a showing because they liked what they saw online. So it's very important that you give them that same experience as they're walking through your home in the live showing. Also important is to have proper signage. Believe it or not, sometimes people can't find the house. The address is not marked properly. We want to make sure that doesn't happen. You want to have a prominent sign. And also for security purposes, copy your front key and make sure you put that in a lockbox secured with a combination or an electronic box as well. Alternatively, you can open the door and let them in and stay there with them, or you can go for a walk. But it's a much more comfortable experience for agents and buyers, and possibly for you as well if you simply have the key in a lockbox. Once the showings are done, of course, you're going to want to know what happened. Primarily, you want to know, is anyone writing an offer? And if there is someone that's interested, when are they expecting to send the offer? And also, are there any other people that saw the house that want to write an offer as well? You want to make sure if there's a possibility of multiple offers coming in, that you know that as soon as possible so you can make sure you get everything on the table to review. Also, if there's any negative feedback, although you may not want to hear it, it can be helpful constructive criticism to improve your listing. If there's something that you could do that would be simple to enhance the experience that buyers have at your showings. The best possible outcome from your showings is to receive an offer or maybe multiple offers. Everybody knows the most important term in that offer is going to be price, but there are other terms to consider. If you have more than one offer, you'll want to take a look at the financing to see which one is the best option. There could be conventional, FHA, USDA, VA, or even cash, and you want to make sure you understand the pros and cons of each type. Closing date is very important. It's common sense, but the buyer is going to want to take possession of the home on the same day that they close. They want to get the keys at closing. So you want to make sure that you have plans for where you're going to live from then, because of course you're giving the house to them on that particular date. So if you have multiple offers, or even if you just have the one offer, you may want to propose a different closing date, something that works better for your schedule to move. Some concessions can be included in the offer. One of the most common is seller paid closing costs or settlement charges. So it is the buyer's option to request that. Typically, sellers will look at that and subtract that concession from the price to come up with what's the net price that the buyer is offering. Home warranty is another common concession that's in there on most offers as well. You want to make sure you understand what those are and get some tips on how to negotiate those away if you can. Common contingencies in the contract, number one would be the inspection contingency. Almost every buyer is going to request that or even require that and won't negotiate that away. They want to make sure they have a professional look through the home, make sure it's in good shape, make sure there's no repairs needed or no major defects in the home that would affect their decision to purchase the home and move in. Another contingency, as we already spoke of, is the financing. If that doesn't go through, they're not going to buy the house. So that's where the financing terms become very important if you want to close the deal. And the appraisal contingency is another common one, which is part of the financing contingency. So one of the advantages of a cash offer is they don't have to do an appraisal. Another contingency that is not so common and is definitely not desirable, especially in this market, is the buyer's home needing to be sold before they complete the purchase of this home. So they may say they're contingent on the sale of their current home, for example. If that's the case, I recommend you wouldn't take that offer unless it's your only option. If it is, you want to definitely find out more about the sale of their current home. Is it on the market? Is it under contract? If it is under contract, are they past inspections? What's the status? You definitely want to get as much information as that as possible. But as you can see, it's not as simple as it is on TV, where they take an offer over the phone and it's all about just the price and they accept an offer and everyone's happy and there's no issues. There's a lot of detail to it. It's an 8-page contract. There's a lot of terms and conditions that you need to understand fully in order to negotiate the best price and the best terms of your offer. After you've received your offer or multiple offers, it's time to negotiate. You can accept an offer, you can reject an offer, or most commonly, you can counteroffer, which legally speaking is a rejection of the offer and a presentation of a new offer. Of course, the most important term in the contract in the offer, as we've discussed, is going to be price. So you can simply, if you don't like the price, simply counteroffer on price and leave the other terms the same. But as you're going to see here, these are the other terms that we've discussed just previously in the offers slide. There's many different terms and conditions of any contract, and you want to make sure you understand fully all 8 pages of the contract because you're legally bound to perform those terms and conditions of the contract. So not only those terms, but also the deadlines. You want to make sure you pay close attention to the dates that are in there, that you can meet those deadlines, and also that you think the buyer can meet those deadlines. So one example would be if they're financing the purchase, they're getting a loan, it takes time to approve that and to do all the underwriting and everything. So if you have a buyer who's financing the transaction and says they're going to close in 14 days, we definitely want to have a conversation with the loan officer and the underwriting team to make sure that's actually possible. So your understanding of all of the terms and conditions of the contract is going to affect directly your ability to negotiate the best deal for yourself and also ultimately to close the deal, because of course the offer is no good if it doesn't close. So this is where you want to get as much advice as you possibly can. If you're not working with an agent, you should probably at least talk with a real estate attorney, somebody who understands the contract language and also understands real estate as well. Electronic signatures are something that's not necessarily guaranteed, even if you are working with an agent. That's a discussion you want to have before you work with them to make sure that you can do electronic signatures. It's no longer a preference or just a convenience. It's a matter of need for sellers because the speed of the market is so fast. Inventory is so low. Buyers, when they're certain they want the house, they want to know a lot of times within a couple hours what your decision is. Of course, you need time to think about it. So you're going to take time to discuss this with anyone who's selling with you and take time to think about it critically. But once it's time to make that decision, we don't have time to find a place to meet, to run over to my office for me to meet you at your house and sign this on paper in person. We need to get that signed electronically and sent back to the agent or the buyer immediately in order for these negotiations to continue in good faith. If we miss a deadline, even if it's unintentionally, we may scare off the buyer. So we want to make sure, you want to make sure rather, that you have the ability to do electronic signatures to make sure that the negotiations go as smoothly as possible. Once you've accepted an offer, in most cases, the inspection contingency will be a part of that contract. So these are some of the types of inspections that are typically done. The general is also called a whole house inspection. That's what most of us are familiar with. The report from that is usually 40, 50 pages or more that goes through every item in the home, everything from structural to electrical, plumbing, HVAC, all of the trades all together to give a good overview of the condition of the home and any repairs that may be needed, and also just ongoing maintenance that the buyer, if they do close and move into the home, should consider in the future. A radon test is also something that can be done, lead-based paint, or any other trade-specific follow-up inspections can be done. All of this has to happen during what's called the inspection period, which is going to be a timeline that's set in the contract. So you do have to follow that, as well as the buyer, make sure that they're sticking to their deadline as well. But essentially they can do all kinds of inspections of the property itself during that period of time. They can also review the HOA documents if you are part of a homeowners association. So you want to make sure you provide that in a timely fashion. That's also legally bound in the contract with a certain timeline as well. And the buyer's also going to research any external factors. They may look at crime rate or sex offender registry or school ratings or anything else that's important to them. Maybe there's some sort of a new commercial development or a new highway system being put in nearby that may affect their decision to purchase the home. Those are all external factors that they're going to consider. So the buyer's rights within this inspection period, they can do one of three things. They can accept the condition of your home as it currently is and move forward with the process. Number two, they can request some repairs that were recommended by the home inspector, or they can simply terminate the contract. They can walk away. So unfortunately, this is where we see most of the problems with contracts. Still, most contracts do close, but the ones that do not close typically will have an issue within the inspection period or the following negotiation. Buyers get excited when they see the house, but then inspections reveal all of the flaws. So naturally, they become less excited about the house. So it's really important to understand how to navigate once they've seen all of the flaws in the home. How do we communicate to them? How do we remind them of why they're purchasing or considering purchasing this home in the first place? So we'll see here in the next step, once they've made their decision, assuming, as they do in most cases, they request some repairs. As a seller, what are you going to do to make the buyer feel comfortable moving forward without spending too much money doing a bunch of repairs? In most cases, your buyer is going to request repairs after they have reviewed the inspection report. So you have now the opportunity to negotiate the repair request that they've made. So your first option, of course, is to simply accept their requests. If you do that, then you need to complete those repair requests before closing. You're contractually obligated to do so, and they will be checking up with that on their final walkthrough before they close. Of course, you can flat out reject their requests. This would mean that you're not going to do any repairs for them whatsoever. At that point, the buyer has a couple options. They can either terminate the contract if they disagree with your rejection, or they can accept the condition of your home as is. The second option is less commonly understood because the buyer did have the opportunity to accept the condition of the home first, but they requested repairs. But they still maintain the right after they request repairs. If you reject their request, they still have the right to move forward, to accept the home in its current condition, and to move past the inspection contingency at that point. Your rejection doesn't necessarily mean that the contract is automatically terminated. The most common thing that happens is sellers will counteroffer, much like you did with the initial terms and conditions of the offer. To the repair requests, you may accept some and reject others. So those repairs that you do agree to complete, you're going to have to get done before closing, but you don't have to do all of them. You can also alternatively offer a price reduction rather than doing repairs. And the buyer is going to still have that right to either terminate based on your counteroffer or accept your counteroffer. Also, they could counteroffer your counteroffer, and we could go back and forth several times. But during what is called the settlement period is when this negotiation takes place, and it is a specific time frame as dictated in the contract. If there's no written agreement reached by both parties before that settlement period ends, then legally the contract automatically expires and it terminates automatically. So we want to make sure that you keep really close eye on the timeline, all of the contract dates. Again, this negotiation of repair requests is called the settlement period. So you want to make sure that you understand what your rights are and what the buyer's rights are, and stay within the timeline to reach a deal. If you feel like this is a buyer that's going to work for you, we want to make sure you can handle that negotiation properly to move on to the next step and close this deal. If you've successfully negotiated the buyer's repair requests, or if the buyer has simply accepted the condition of your home as is, then you've moved on from the inspection contingency toward the appraisal contingency. At this point, the lender is going to order an appraisal. If the value determined in the appraisal is greater than or equal to the purchase price in the contract, then the lender is going to move forward with the loan underwriting, and there's no further action required in regard to the appraised value. If, unfortunately, the appraisal comes in low, if it's less than the purchase price, then the buyer has three options. Number one, the buyer is allowed to pay the difference in cash. As you may guess, they don't do that very often. Sometimes they do if they really want the house and they feel like the appraisal is bad, if it's unnecessarily low. And if they have the cash, they may be willing to do that in order to close the deal. In most cases, they don't exercise that option. The second option they have, and second most common option, is they terminate the contract. Once they've determined that the lender's not going to go through with the loan at that price, they may just have second thoughts about the home in general. If they're offering a certain price and it came in really low, they may just have lost interest in the home and feel like it's a bad investment. It's their right, unfortunately for you, at this point, because the appraisal came in low, to terminate the contract. The most common thing that happens if the appraisal is low is that the buyer wants to renegotiate the price. So typically, buyer and seller, if they both want to close the deal, will agree to renegotiate the price, change it to the appraised value, depending on how different it is from the purchase price. Sometimes they may meet in the middle, which is kind of a combination of the buyer paying the difference in cash and renegotiating. Either way, if the appraisal is low, you may want to seek some professional counsel on this to try to get a second opinion from another appraisal or maybe a real estate agent that can provide different comps in order to support the value of the home that you guys had in the original purchase contract. Either way, this is an important step. Typically, there's not issues, but as we're seeing home values rise quickly, we are seeing more issues more often with appraisals. And this is something that unfortunately can terminate your contract pretty quickly. So it's important that you understand your rights and the buyer's rights as you navigate the appraisal contingency. Once you've passed the inspection and the appraisal contingencies, it's time to prepare for closing. The title company will review the deed, make sure there's no liens, encumbrances, or any other issues with transferring title to the new owners. Also, the lender will do final underwriting to check credit score, debt-to-income ratio, job status, and other things to make sure that the buyer's creditworthiness has not changed since pre-approval. Once the underwriting is finished, the loan approval will be issued by the lender. The buyer is actually obligated to achieve loan approval by a certain date in the contract. Many sellers and their agents overlook this date. The seller actually has the option to terminate the contract if the buyer is late in achieving loan approval. A lot of times, even if the buyer is late with this, because we're about 25 to 30 days into the contract, typically the seller will opt to continue with that buyer. But if you're in this situation as a seller, the loan approval is late, and you happen to have a better offer, whether it's a backup contract or someone else that's interested in writing a better offer, you may want to entertain exercising this option to terminate and go for the better buyer. Assuming we've achieved loan approval and moved forward, the lender is going to issue a closing disclosure, which essentially puts the buyer on notice of all the line item charges for the loan, all of the details spelled out in very plain, simple language. This is a recent federal regulation as of the past few years that it is required to be delivered to the buyer, and also the buyer needs 3 business days before they're allowed to close in order to review this. From that information, the title company will prepare a settlement statement, which is going to be debits and credits, line items, both for the buyer and the seller. So this is where you're going to see your exact proceeds. You're also going to see the commission from your realtor if you're working with one that comes out of there. You're also going to see your property tax proration given to the buyer so they can pay that bill next year when that's due, and also your transfer taxes and other miscellaneous charges. You want to make sure you review that carefully, make sure the math is correct, and make sure there aren't any additional charges that you do not owe. Once all that's complete, we schedule the closing, confirm that date, time, and location. In the Cincinnati market, we still typically do things the old-fashioned way, which is a round table closing. This means buyers and sellers and their agents and the title agent all meet in one room around one table at the same place at the same time. So this makes it a lot easier to exchange keys, to get the wire transfer or check for the proceeds, to button everything up, even buyers and sellers to discuss things that the buyer might want to know about the neighborhood that might be helpful as they move in. Of course, if a roundtable closing is not possible due to scheduling conflicts, other arrangements can be made, but we still do need ink signatures as opposed to electronic signatures for the closing documents. Thanks for watching. I hope you've learned enough to make an informed decision about the best way to list your home and sell quickly for top dollar. If you'd like to learn more about my service, or if you have any questions about the selling process, click the link or copy and paste it into your browser. It'll prompt you to answer a few questions to help me better understand your needs and your communication preference. Thanks again, and we'll talk soon.